Tēnā te whānau ai māku tā tātou hei e whakatūwhare nei, nō reira, me karakia tātou. Tukuna te wairua kia rere ki ngā taumata, hei arahi I tā tātou mahi, me tā tātou whai ki ngā tikanga a mātou a rātou mā, kia mau, kia ita, kia kore ai ngaro, kia pupuri, kia whakamaua, kia tina, haumie, huie, tai ki e. Ai, morena, e ngā rauranga tira kua hui hui mai nei, nau mai hoki mai anō ki tā tātou hui, te hui whakamutunga o te wiki, e rere ana ngā mihi kia koutou katoa, ko hono mai anō, o tira kia koutou mena ko tēnei te wātua tahi mau. Ai, ka hari ko te ngākau kia koutou, kua rauhi mai, I mea wāhi ki te tautoko I tēnei kaupapa whakahirahira, arā, ai, karanga mai te kaupapa, nō reira, tēnā koutou, kei aku rangatira, Māori ora kia tātou katoa. Ka pai, ka koe Wayne.
Tēnā koe Shoni. Ua nō rā e rau rangatira mā, nau mai hoki mai ki tēnei wānanga o tātou. Nō reira, te mea tuatahi, me mihi a kātika ki a koe te tuahine e Shoni, nau I tuku I te reo whakamoemiti, kia tau rāno te wairu o te hākuakua, ki runga ki a tātou I tēnei ata. O te rā ki a tātou katoa, kua tae mai ki tēnei wānanga topa, ki tēnei whare kōrero o tātou, tēnā koutou, kua kei whia, kua kō ai, nau mai, haere mai, whakatau mai rā. My name is Wayne, Wayne Knox, the General Manager for Te Matapihi, and it's my pleasure to be a host and facilitator. I'd just like to introduce Michaela Reilly, who's here on behalf of Community Housing Regulatory Authority to present to us on a couple of the performance standards that you'll need to familiarise yourself with, meeting the tenancy management requirements and also the property and asset management performance standards. And before I hand over to Michaela, I'd just like to acknowledge CHRA for the openness, their support for this kaupapa. In my experience, TRA has been very accessible, always very personable and open to exploring and responding to questions and supporting the needs of not just existing CHPs, but also those who are coming through the process. So with that, Michelle, I'd like to hand the time over to you.
Thank you. Kia ora koutou mā, tātou to everybody for the observations that have been made. We know about the work in this process and the challenges involved. I won't call them obstacles, though I'm well aware that everybody else will. But there are the challenges in getting this registration in place. We have heard actually that applicants feel much better when it's over. That's not just in the joking sense, but because it provides them confidence that a structure's in place for the future. So we've got some hopeful words with this, but I'm afraid it's also full of the boring stuff. I will say, though, that we have the great privilege at CHRA of both of meeting everyone doing this work and seeing how it works out. We try to be supportive and helpful to everyone that comes to us, but we really value the lessons we learn along the way. Learning about different tikanga and kawa is definitely part of this process, and we are always trying to incorporate what we hear from each applicant into the next process and the next application that we deal with. We all know whare are both a place to live and they're a place to be. The current and future value of having a safe home is incalculable, even though I know that the Treasury has tried to calculate the value of having a safe and stable home. I don't know that the number will ever be achieved. So our performance standards are just part of the structure we can help you with for providing stable and successful homes. The great thing about being involved in community housing provision is you get to provide homes for your whānau. That's the most wonderful thing about it, your whānau and the tenants on your list. The worst thing about it is you're providing homes for your whānau and the tenants on your list. There's an amazing scope there to get into arguments and to have to put rules in place for dealing with people who you not only know well, but whose needs you know well. So these three performance standards have a goal to provide you with safety in dealing with your tenants and providing rules, properties and procedures, but so that your housing will be in place into the future, not just for months and years, but hopefully for decades. So you'll see that this is the fourth of our performance standards, tenancy management, and it falls into 3 rough groups. I won't rattle off the text of each one, but I will just talk generally about them. So they are meeting the legal requirements of tenancy management, applying effective and strong principles to tenancy management, and managing tenants' personal information properly. So meeting the legal requirements of tenancy management is something you will see has popped up in 2 of our performance standards already. It appears in governance, and there's also mention of it in management. It's the role of the general manager and the tenancy manager to make sure that those things are in place. You need to make sure that you know what the applicable legislation is. We ask you to have an established list. We have a list we provide, but hopefully that will stay roughly the same. The key in this is maintaining some processes that you are aware of any changes. So that can cover reporting changes to the board regularly, or even just saying we aren't aware of any. If there are changes, explaining to the board, the management and the staff what changes are going to affect them. And if you've got the legislation listed in your document, making sure that that changes too, if it needs to. So all of that's going to support your internal audit. It'll make sure your board and your staff know where, when and how legislation applies to them, especially when it's changed. Here we're talking about effective and strong principles to tenancy management. And unfortunately, this is really the sharp end. Your policies and procedures need to cover making sure tenants have the written information that they need. It's handy if it is written. It's amazing how often you need to know something about getting hold of your landlord when the power's gone off, for instance, or when water is pouring all over the floor, or something else has gone wrong. We've had lots of funny examples of this, but I say we did have a tenant say, I was trying to find the tenancy handbook, a neighbouring dog had a fight with the one down the road, crashed through the fence, and I really wanted to know what I needed to do to get that fence fixed. I was scrabbling through my kitchen cupboards looking for the tenancy handbook. So it's a good idea if it's written down. The next item of being effective and strong is allocating housing according to need. Now, this is really difficult. You need to consider the needs of your tenant group. You need to understand how you're going to manage information about allocation. And this is something else we have seen applicants and registered providers have interesting issues with. You need to understand how you're going to manage tenant hardship. Things always go wrong. You can guarantee that they will. People are going to go into arrears with their rent. So you need to have rules in place not only for how you're going to handle those arrears, but who is empowered to make agreements with tenants about what they need to do. You need to make sure you have accurate tenant records. You don't have to subscribe to a database, although many of the providers do find that useful, but you have to make sure those records are accurate. There's nothing worse than arguing with people about what they do or they don't owe. You need to be able to manage complaints and appeals in a consistent way. So you need a policy for that, and you need to be able to show on paper and to anyone who needs to know what happened, how it was handled, and what the outcome was. And the last useful thing here is measuring tenant satisfaction. You need to know when your tenants are happy. You need to have a general opportunity to get information from them, and you need to know what you're going to do with that information afterwards. So let's talk about managing tenants' information properly. It means doing it in the right way. So your policies and procedures for information need to make sure that you're collecting the right tenant information. You've stored it safely so that only the right people can access that information, and that I guess that if your other parts of your organisation need to know something about your tenants, that they can find out what they need to know, but not what they don't need to know. You need to know what you're allowed to ask tenants to tell you. You make sure the information is stored securely. In the good old days, we kept files. These days, we have electronic databases. It's entirely likely that those paper files were more secure than electronic information that you can send to the wrong place, and sometimes to many wrong places, with the push of a button. You also need to make sure you dispose of information at the correct intervals. You don't have to keep some information forever or even for very long. Make sure you know what information you've got and how long you need to have it for. Now, I will make some comments here, not so much about tenants' information, but about getting information from tenant surveys. Now, this is something that we have seen providers have a few issues with. Often matters come up in tenant surveys that they haven't wanted to discuss with the tenancy manager. And it can often be in the nature of complaints about something that's gone wrong. Tenant surveys are often a great place to find this information, but they're not necessarily a good place to handle it. And they're also not necessarily, the tenant's going to say the tenancy manager is not necessarily the right person to handle it either. So what we do suggest in a general sense, and actually this is an area we're still working on, is thinking about some information you might want to collect from tenants over a period of years. General information, not specific information.
Whānau, it's a really important standard for us all to be cognizant of. And as Michaela has said, you know, it's the best thing and possibly the hardest thing about being the CHP is looking after whānau that we know and understand some of their needs and some of the challenges they experience. So really important that we're doing that in a sensitive way.
Hi, ata Māori. This part is around the allocation of whare, and so before you become a registered CHP, all of these need to be evident. So you need to view all of the procedures, the process and procedures. I te tuatahi, Michaela? Yep, cool. So how loose can those procedures be for a trust? Is there a preferred procedure for it?
We don't have great sound coming here, Kararangi, so apologies for that. What I thought you said was, do we need to see what your allocation policies and procedures are going to be in your application? Yes, we do. That doesn't mean they have to stay the same right across your weeks, months and years of operation. You can change them. They often change when you've got more housing or different kinds of housing to offer, so they don't have to be hard and fast. But we do need to see something at the beginning that explains what it is that you can offer and how you're going to do it. Yeah.
Kia ora.
Can I respond to that as well?
Yes, go for it.
Oh, sorry, I'll just pop around here.
Right, Adam.
It is interesting. So we do require that if you have an IRS contract, you'll need to have an allocations policy that's based on need. If you're offering your own affordable rental tenancies, you can be more selective in your criteria for how you provide that housing, which is totally fine. It's a really interesting issue, the allocations thing, because it's rubbed up in the past against what I'm aware of at least one, but there might be more, Māori providers consider to be their tikanga and how they deal with this, particularly the concept of manaakitanga. You know, we don't allocate, you know, everyone who comes to us has a housing need, so how do you do that? I don't have a hard and fast answer for you on that, except to say we expect to see a policy that has some acknowledgement of need, but that policy could equally acknowledge that manaakitanga aspect to it as well. So yeah, happy to have that discussion though when you come to us. Thank you.
I think at least one provider that we know of, which is a slightly bigger one, has a process where everyone with the same assessed level of need goes into a ballot. And while it might sound terrible, you draw someone's name out of a hat, that is what happens. It's not entirely the best way to do it, but yeah, it was decided that it was the fairest.
Yeah, so this question was coming through Māori trusts that have the Māori Te Māori lens, And it came from manaakitanga. So when the trust puts through the registration and in their policies and procedures, they may have come through a te ao Māori lens, but the chips, what the chips were wanting were more of a, the hard policy focused way. So for them to register it as a chip. But no, kapai, thank you. He did answer my pātai. Ngā mihi.
It's very much a relationship management exercise. I could follow on by saying that one of the people we spoke to who did get their home in the ballot said felt really lucky to have got their home, but they also realised that all eyes were on them to make it really obvious that they deserved to have it. And it was an interesting way to watch it pan out. Yes.
Kapai, thank you for the question, Kauhurangi, very relevant for aspiring Māori chips. I've got another pātai on the chat. What kind of documents should rōpū prepare? Are there any insights into the themes, issues where the authority needs to regularly ask rōpū to make changes?
I think probably every single application is different, so no, there's nothing regular. One we have had pop up a couple of times is where single tenants have asked or been allocated as having a need for a 2-bedroom home. The reason they need a 2-bedroom home is they have a carer with them at least part of the time, and that can be a little bit tricky because sometimes they only have housing for one. So do you want your carer to sleep in the lounge? Do you want what's technically a single tenant to be taking up a 2-bedroom home? So you need to make an allowance in the policy for how you're going to cover that. I should also say we've also seen this happen where the tenant has passed on, but the carer still needs a home. So the succession of that tenancy needs to be made quite clear too, whether the carer has any right to stay in that place, which has often been their home for a long time, and sometimes the home for their whānau as well, when the tenant who was allocated the home is no longer there. There is no hard and fast rule. There's no easy way of doing it either, but we have seen that crop up several times now.
And the other part, Michaela, was around what kind of documents should rōpū prepare, I think, to meet this performance.
Okay, so that particular aspect falls under an allocations policy. So it's a general statement of who you are expecting to house, in many cases why, and some idea of how that need might be graded or allocated. Some of the examples that could go into that is if people don't have a home at the moment, if they are living away from the rohe but want to come back, if they have relatives already there, things like that. Yeah. So it's an allocation policy with lots of different elements in it.
Sorry, I just thought maybe we could get that slide up for a second. So just in terms of the documents that need to be provided there, so providing tenants with written information, a tenant handbook is the best way of demonstrating that. That includes information on tenants' rights and responsibilities as set out under the Residential Tenancies Act. And you can get that online. There's a very good summary of those rights and responsibilities that you can lift and shift into your tenant handbook. Your tenant handbook should also cover complaints, maintenance, contact issues, all of those sorts of general information that a tenant needs to see. So the next one is an allocations policy. You'll need a specific policy on that. And if you've got different types of housing, so IRRS housing you intend to have, and affordable rental, a different policy for each sort of type of housing. A policy for dealing with rent arrears you will need, and in that it's really good to have a process for dealing with rent arrears that specifically states that eviction will be considered only as a last resort, and that there are other steps that will be taken to get there. So in the first instance, really good oversight of the rents that are coming in, so that if an arrears situation starts to develop, that can quickly be got on top of. But once arrears have developed, things like repayment plans and referring tenants to appropriate support services should be in those policies. keeping accurate records, so record keeping policy, a complaints policy that there's several things we like to see in a complaints policy, and that is that, for a start, a good introductory statement that, you know, your organisation welcomes complaints. Complaints happen in any organisation. That tenants won't be penalised for making a complaint, that you will use it instead and view it as an opportunity to improve your business. Then, the policy should also cover how complaints can be raised in writing, over the phone, how they're recorded, how they're investigated, including timeframes for responding to those complaints, how they're reported, how aggregate complaints data is reported to the board, because that's also useful information to the board too, as a little bit of a test of how the organisation's functioning. And tenant satisfaction, a regular tenant satisfaction survey, either annually or biannually. When biannually, I mean once every 2 years, not once every 6 months. So those are the sorts of documents that we are looking for. Thanks.
That's great, very helpful. Thanks, Marty. Robert, did you have a Ka Taea?
I do, Wayne. I was just going to write it up in chat, but then I thought I'll ask the question. Inevitably, as Māori landlord organisations, and whether we're a CHP or not, and this what makes us a little bit different in many respects, is that it's inevitable that at some point along the way, and it could be a lot along the way, we are a landlord to our own whānau. And that means the challenges that we have as a landlord organisation is sometimes a lot different. And I come across it many times about the struggles of being a landlord to our own whānau. And sometimes the whānau who are the tenants are also beneficial owners in the land. So it's not always a straight tenant landlord residential tenancies act legal arrangement, and I think as Māori providers we have to deal with different challenges, and I'm just wondering how that's reflected in the performance standards, and whether the performance standards potentially might overlook or contradict that obligation that we have.
Do you want to go?
Oh, I'm going to have a go before Marty comes in. You can really see who's been doing this longer than me in this room. It's Marty. You're very right there, Robert. This is really the nuts of it. As I said, this is the best of times and the worst of times when it comes to providing your whānau with homes. As you say, they're not only your family, but they often have ownership in the property that they live in, and sometimes in the organisation that's paying your wages. So it becomes very complicated indeed. I can only comment from the way we've seen this play out amongst the providers. One has commented that they made sure record keeping was very secure, so information about what discussions had been had with who was very carefully guarded. One provider went to the extent of employing a whānau member as a tenancy manager who hadn't lived in the area for a very long time, simply because she said there was nothing anyone could get me on. I haven't been here for 20 years, which I thought was hilarious. It's hard to say how do you interact with your whānau in a professional manner, but I think it comes back to what I said earlier on about keeping you safe. If you have agreed rules in place and you can show that you have followed them, that really is the best that you can do. Sometimes the role of the tenancy manager is not one that you can take on long term. You might need to cycle someone else into it and give the person that's been doing it a break for a while. I don't have an easy answer here. You're quite right, Robert. This is the biggest challenge of it all.
I think in terms of the performance standards and how we apply them, I think that one of the great things about regulation is that it, unlike contract, I think it does leave that space for an organisation to be true to who it is and what it is, and how it wants to deliver things. We are not trying to grow in a sector of cookie cutter organisations where everyone looks exactly the same. We want a sector of diverse organisations that deliver housing in their own unique way. That being so, I think that there is room in how we assess policies and procedures for that individuality to be recognised. But at the same time, I guess the cutoff point for us where we have to say, right, it has to be this particular way if a policy or procedure breaches legislation. One of the things that all organisations must do is comply with the law, and there's sometimes policies and procedures which step right up against that, and that for us, I mean, the separation of services stuff, why we enforce it so rigorously is because if organisations are allowed to put conditions in their tenancy agreements that a tenant must accept support services, for example, that breaches a number of really key pieces of legislation, including the Health and Disability Commissioners Code, the Privacy Act, the Human Rights Act, etc. So that's why we police that really quite stringently. But at the same time, in terms of general policies and procedures around tenancy management, I think there's enough scope in what we do for individual differences to come through. I hope that answers your question a little bit.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And don't get me started on cooperatives, Marty. We don't have those here, really. Sort of a related question. So there are always going to be some people inside an organisation who will say, well, because of those things, why don't we just go down an outsourcing model? Why don't we just outsource tenancy management, even if it's to another registered CHP? I've seen a few examples where organisations have outsourced their tenancy and property management to a registered CHP. And I mean, I would always prefer that they do it to a registered CHP than to a real estate firm, but I know some that have gone that way as well, but I would prefer going down a registered CHP. I think what I've observed is that there are some good relationships where a registered CHP is providing tenancy and property management services to another organisation, whether it's a marae or an ahu whenua trust. I've seen some bad examples where it's not a strong relationship at all. And one example I'm thinking of, in this case, it's a marae. They basically said that the organisation that's a registered CHP that's doing our tenancy management are basically leaving all the hard stuff to us. So we're having to deal with the whānau directly anyway. We're the ones that have to knock on the door if there's some issues. We're not sure we're getting value for money, and we might as well do it ourselves. And then you have a risk that you've got an organisation then taking it on themselves that are not a registered CHP, don't have the same sort of level of systems and processes because they weren't getting a good service from the registered CHP. And I'm wondering whether in your performance standards, because we actually want a mature sector out there where groups can go to a registered CHP and get a pretty good service, that's value for money, but is actually getting all the benefits of the fact that they're a registered CHP. But you don't have any performance standards about how registered CHPs provide services to other organisations. And I'm just wondering whether that's something that needs to be looked at.
It's quite possibly something that does need to be looked at, Robert, but it is. I can say that it's something that we have given absolutely no consideration to date. I know that's probably not the answer that you wanted to hear, but it's the truthful answer at the moment. But certainly something we'd be prepared to consider in future.
Pātai there. Robert always can it's very relevant pātai, and I have also heard of Ropu who would sooner delegate the role of tenancy management rather than take that upon themselves because of those very reasons of having to deal with putting people into a very conflicted situation. So we'll get back into it, and again, I'll hand over to Michaela to now run us through the property and asset management performance standard. Thank you, Michaela.
Thank you. Okay, so this is performance standard. We number as performance standard 5, and taking Irene's point earlier, I'll be a little bit more specific about the policies and procedures that we need to have for this performance standard, and if we need to go back to the earlier one, we can do that too. So what we look for under this performance standard is making sure that your policies and procedures cover planning for property that you buy and that you might sublet from a private landlord or from another organisation, and for matching your properties to your tenant group, and that's the whānau that you have decided that you are going to house or try and house. So you need to have policies and procedures in place to cover both of those things. Planning for property purchases also needs to cover planning for building. I will just say here that we have had a few providers run into problems when their neighbours have said they didn't know what was being built in their area, and we have said to them, and we'll say to others, it's a good idea to keep the neighbourhood informed if you are going to be building. You can front foot this process just by doing a letterbox drop. This is not in any shape or form asking anyone's permission for what you are doing, but it does pass the information out to them before they have to grumble that they had to come and ask for it. If you've got your contact information there, you can deal with questions as they arise. So when you're planning for property purchase and subleases, your policies and procedures need to think about what sort of properties do you need. If you can possibly get properties that are purpose-built for every need, you can look for homes and units that have wide hallways, wide doorways, not just flat access, but a safe grade access so that wheelchairs or people with mobility aids can't fall off the sides. It's easier to have all of those things in place when the property comes under your control than to try and put them in later as modifications. Other things that you might need to include in your planning for purchasing and subleasing is whether the modifications are in place to use those homes, and if you've got the budget to pay for them. So that will come under your financial delegations. If you have rented homes that need modifications, you need to make sure you have the budget to cover that. You also need to be able to plan to dispose of properties that you do have but no longer need. This might be because they're the wrong size, they're in the wrong place, or they've got future maintenance costs that you don't want to meet. They might, for instance, have things like asbestos roofs. The property is too close to the road to be safe for children. It's too far away from bus stops or shopping centres, or there's going to be expensive work needed in the meantime. So all of those things have to come under what kind of properties you will look to lease and properties you'd look to buy, as well as where you might like to build. I mentioned earlier on matching your properties to your tenant group. You may very well find that a single tenant needs a 2-bedroom house, for example. Something else that sometimes falls into this area is deciding how many tenants should be in a home. Tenancy agreements are usually signed with head tenants, but there may be that tenants have other people with them. Now, this last aspect of the performance standard comes under managing the property standards. So your policies and procedures here, the rules that we look to have in place are managing your maintenance work and meeting building and housing standards. Now, your tenants will often helpfully tell you that something has gone wrong. Taps start dripping, cupboards don't shut, doors don't lock or they wriggle around, bits fall off patios and steps and fences. Those are maintenance, what we call responsive maintenance. Something has broken. You also have maintenance that needs to be done or checked regularly. Often things like this are making sure drain pipes are still attached to the house, that spouting still works and is not blocked up, windows are still latched properly, and those things are done on more of a routine basis. So you would expect to have somebody checking your properties every 6 months, sometimes every year, to make sure all of those things are still in place. So you've got to manage both responsive maintenance, which is when the tenants ask you to fix something, and regular maintenance or planned maintenance, which says that every year somebody will go around all of our homes, preferably before the winter, make sure all the guttering is unblocked and the drain pipes are still attached and that water coming out of those pipes is going where it should be. It's surprising how often drainage becomes a problem, I found. The other aspect of this property performance standard is meeting building and housing standards. This also actually reflects back to our legislation requirements in the earlier performance standards. There are minimum standards for building and housing, and there are minimum standards also for rentals. This is a favourite of the newspapers and of Trade Me ads, where you'll see someone has tried to rent a property where the stove doesn't work, the hot water doesn't work, or something like that. So you need to make sure that your properties at all time meet the minimum standards. Your policy should have a statement along those lines and some step-by-step instructions for how the staff you employ are going to meet those. Both of these aspects, managing work and meeting building and housing standards, tend to fall under the property and asset manager and the tenancy manager both. The tenancy manager often will notice something needs doing, but it's the property and asset manager's role, or whatever you've termed that, to make sure these things are done. So maintenance work needs to be scheduled. Your policy should state that you will only use qualified tradespeople. That will affect your insurance especially if it's for electricity, for restricted building work, or for plumbing and drainage. You need to make sure that your policy has someone deputised to check the work is done on time, that it's done to the right standard. Tenants need to make sure that the tenants know that someone is coming to do something in particular, and they should be aware of when that tradesperson needs to come into their property. The tradesperson must make sure that they are identified, clean up after themselves, don't make themselves free of the tenant's home, kitchen, bathroom, etc. They are not supposed to do that. We have actually seen quite a few providers with property and maintenance departments who use whānau members to do that. That's great, and it works really well. It's a really good training area for young tradespeople. It's another opportunity to get an advantage from your housing operation, but it does need to be well managed. Now, meeting building and housing standards involves making sure you have all the information on hand that shows your overall level of standards and liabilities. Your policy should show when you're going to check things, what you're going to do if roofing needs doing, for example, and some expectation of how long your standards can be expected to stay in place before you need to change them. It also is a really good tool to have if you are applying for funding or assistance for particular kinds of work like gardening, fencing or painting. If you know that 6 of your properties are going to need painting this year, if 4 fences need inspecting and so on, it's really easy to put your hand up and say we can make use of some help for those. So I think I might stop here and see if there are any questions, because it seems obvious that examples are much more useful for these things than going through the points. So is there anything anybody would like to ask?
Yeah, thank you. So I have thought of a couple of questions.
Cool.
Just one of them, Michaela, is around disposal and acquisition, which I know is a performance standard, is part of a performance standard.
Yes.
But, you know, Martin did acknowledge that there are some smaller chits who may have acquired some housing and they have no aspiration to grow their portfolio. And because, you know, of their connection to the whenua, they have no intention in order to dispose of those properties either. Would they still need to have a policy around disposal and acquisition, even though that is not ever going to be an intention to use that?
It's a really good point, actually, Jen, and we have had many applicants say we will only ever be acquiring properties, we don't intend to dispose of them. I would say it would be a good idea to include it, if only because I can think of one instance where a property was gifted to a provider, but it was not in their area, it was actually outside the boundaries. The difficulty arose then when they said, well, we would rather sell this and use the money to build something better. And the immediate reaction at that AGM was, in this particular day and age, we shouldn't be selling property. We should use it no matter what. They did have a policy in place that said we will build or acquire properties only within our area, and when they were advised that the property had been left to them by somebody had died and it was bequeathed to them, the immediate reaction was the property manager was, this is going to be a saleable asset. This is not something we want to keep. So yes, I would say it's a good idea to include disposal in your policies, because you may acquire something in a way that you don't expect, and you may need to justify why it is you don't want to keep it.
That's really interesting. Thank you. Thank you for that, Michaela. And then the other one, which in a way kind of relates to that, is that CHPs do need to maintain and upgrade their homes, so have that whole, maintenance process. But sometimes some rōpū might come into their housing as part of a treaty settlement. And so obviously they have a steep learning curve, and quite often those homes are just almost unlivable. So at the time that they might become a CHP, those homes are not fit for purpose. And does the authority allow those emerging CHPs to have time to adequately upgrade and maintain those homes up to a certain level where even, if we're looking at 12 properties, that could actually take them a couple of years to do that? Does the authority give them that time?
I can't think of an instance where this has happened. I can think of where properties on hand or properties that have come through settlement have, as you say, have barely met habitable standards, just because they are, run-down kainga ora homes, for instance, would be a really obvious example. So long as they are legally habitable, we would look to make sure that a policy is in place and a plan is in place to upgrade them. We are well aware that sometimes the money doesn't come through in time, or the budget doesn't allow, but a recognition that the work needs doing, an undertaking that it will be done as soon as possible, and a regular review to see is it possible now would be the things we would look for, I would say.
And I would just add to that we'd probably also look for, as much as possible, it'd be great if concrete timeframes could be given for when that work would take place by. We know that that's not always possible, but as long as that commitment's there and that planning is there, I think we would be okay with that, as long as it met, of course, those basic legal standards for habitation of a property. But I guess the other point that's associated with that is if you do have any situations like that arise, and you're a registered CHP, please contact us and have a chat with us. I like to think we're a friendly bunch, and we take a non-punitive approach, so we would welcome those conversations at any time.
Kia ora, thank you both.
Yeah.
Very friendly bunch. Irene, he pātaitau e kare.
Kia ora. It was just, I think, in relation to the previous point around the tenureship of the land. So just wondered, Michaela, if you knew of or could talk to it all about where the land is held in Māori, whenua Māori title?
I think Robert might be better able to answer that one than me.
I was going to say ask Robert, but
yeah. The only examples I can think of where we have current providers in that position is there are different iwi entities associated with managing different aspects of it. So there's one group, one legal entity, a company that looks after property and asset management, and there is another company that looks after tenancy management, and they are very separate. There is another one again, I think it is actually the parent body that looks after, is responsible for the overall whenua issues. So that would be, very much separation of function, I think, is how that's been handled. But Robert might have some input for that, and which I would love to hear. Robert, please chime in now.
Sorry, I missed the question. So register CHPs with whenua Māori.
Aye.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think actually. I mean, there's some runanga like Ngati Porou and Ngāpui or Hāua there that are registered, but I don't think they have whenua Māori. Yeah, I actually don't, to be honest, I don't think there's any examples I can think of where there's an ahu whenua trust or a whānau trust that has whenua under the Te Whenua Māori Act that is also a registered CHP. Yeah, I mean, I know of a couple that are using a registered CHP for their tenancy and property management, but they're not registered in their own right. And that actually is you know, like in my experience, you know, I've been doing this for a while with Papa Kāinga. When it comes to the crunch, for most ahu whenua trusts and whānau trusts that are doing a Papa Kāinga, you know, we encourage them to think about getting registered as a CHP. But generally they don't consider it worth their while, and that's partly because of the way they're being funded by Te Puni Kōkiri, so they don't actually need IRRS, so there's no financial imperative. And I think they would find that for small trusts, you know, where housing is just a small part of the farm, or it's just a whānau trust housing their own whānau, it just doesn't seem worthwhile to them. Now, I'm not making any judgments. I'm just reflecting back what they would say. But yeah, good. That's a really good point. I'm not actually aware of any whenua Māori that's under a registered CHP.
Just wondering if maybe Papamoa, up in Papamoa, if there's any up there. There was Ngāpōtiki and there was always Mangatawa.
Oh yeah, Mangatawa Papamoa maybe registered CHP, eh? So that's whenua Māori. Absolutely, that's a good example. Yep. And Ngāpōtiki, I think.
So they have changed, I think.
Yeah.
But yeah, they've also done it. They're a great example where they've been very successful in terms of growing their properties, and also being able to access different funding streams to support them to do that affordably.
Yeah. Good Pātai though, eh? It's a really interesting point.
It's just that earlier we talked, I know we were talking about as landlords, we might run into challenges where the tenants are also shareholders. But that only comes into play if the land is Māori land.
True.
So we should, you know, be careful about those generalisations, because it only applies to Māori land. It doesn't apply to chip-owned land. But in the case of there being whenua Māori available to build on, I do think that we possibly, Michaela, need to do some thinking about this space, because, you know, where else would Māori go in terms of getting land to leverage off, you know, during their chip, in their chip portfolios, and possibly some land would be offered once you are set up as a chip and you are in, you know, iwi organisations, iwi rohe, iwi regions. I know that definitely in Hauraki, that's what we are about to do. We are about to say that as Hauraki, we have land and we want to build, and our land is predominantly Māori owned land, and then we'll have treaty settlements land after that, because we're not settled yet. So it's not so much that we'll become a chip first and then we'll look at a housing strategy. Our housing strategy already says that. But I just wondered why, you know, that comment came up around being careful about being landlords, because, you know, our tenants may be shareholders or beneficiaries. Well, if we can't as a group think of those examples, then it doesn't exist as a category or a group.
It's I think it's an example for us at the moment. So Tauhara North number 2, Tauhara North Kāinga. So Tauhara actually has land holdings, and it's inevitable that in the future we'll be building our own houses on our whenua, and it will be whenua Māori, and will be a registered chip. So it's going to be a real issue for us. But even the papa kāinga that we're doing now, so we're under a build, own, operate, and then transfer model. We're building houses on our mana whenua marae reservations, and so we're going to be owning and operating those houses. And although the whenua is not owned by Tauhara North number 2 Trust, it is whenua Māori, and it is part of the, in our case, Ngati Tahu, Ngati Hāua land holdings. So when we have tenancies there, when we're managing those tenancies, those kaumātua on those marae, from Tauhara's perspective, we're housing our whānau. And so it's quite real. And we're also supporting a couple of whānau trusts and ahu whenua trusts within the Tauhara North number 2 broader group. It's whenua Māori. We're going to be doing the tenancy management for those whānau, but it's like it's our land anyway. So
yes, that's right, Robert. And I'm just listening to everybody talking, I can think of another example. We do have a chip which has leased from marae trusts, because there was just to put someone in place to manage the tenancy relationships that were already there. And in that particular provider, I think, has 3 different kinds of organisations to deal with and different levels of ownership. We'll probably hear sometime during this year how that's working out. It depends a little bit on how long the housing's been in place, it seems, and how well it's been maintained as to how much the tenants are wanting to get involved with what's now their landlord about how it's managed. Yeah, it's an interesting question. Thank you, Irene.
Yeah.
Just on the property management, Michaela, thing is, and you know, me as Te Puni Kōkiri really, but in the early 1990s, the old Department of Māori Affairs kaumātua housing were just, without the government doing any capacity building or considering the organizational capacity, basically transferred the ownership. We think there's probably about 1,200 whare across the motu that were transferred from the old Department of Māori Affairs, often currently run by marae committees and you know, just voluntary organisations within the marae community. We've, as Te Puni Kōkiri, we've had a few of those examples where the houses were poorly maintained, poorly looked after, and you know, and it's not the fault of the committee that was running it, because they just weren't supported at those early days. But there's quite a few houses out there. I've seen marae where you look at the marae and you say, oh, what are those kaumātua houses there? And they're sitting empty or half empty because they just haven't been able to maintain them. We had one example, and I won't mention where, but where we got these panic calls from the kaumātua living in the houses. They were given 3 days to leave their rental house because the council had red stickered it, basically condemned the house. Transpired that over for the last 20 years, the wastewater system had just totally failed and was just not working, and the council had decided that they couldn't allow people to live in those houses anymore. And so we basically, as Te Puni Kōkiri, effectively rescued the situation. We chucked in $40,000 or $50,000 to replace the septic system. And we talked to this case the trustees, and there were originally three trustees that were running it. There was only one left, and he was an older man, and it was just too much, and potentially really important rental housing was going to be lost to whānau because of that. And then when I went and spoke to the tenants in the houses, and I said, Matua, how much rent are you paying? He said, I'm still paying $60 a week. And so, from an organizational management perspective, there was no capacity there. And I'd be really, really sad if in the future we lost houses because they weren't properly supported and managed, which is where regulation, I think, does help.
Yeah, that's actually something we pick up in that last performance standard, and we ask for policies and procedures. We ask providers to make sure that information about what properties they have and what standards they meet is collated and provided to us as part of the application.
Kapai, thank you for that point, Irene.
Yeah, so if I could just add on a little bit to that point, is that the regulations or the legislation is not designed to limit the type of whenua ownership or the type of organisation that gets registered. But where you may come into some difficulty is not just in the delivery of it, but also in accessing IRRS, because it may actually limit your access to finance. And so it may not be at the registration phase where this kōrero needs to be maybe unpacked a little bit further. It might actually be at the IRRS contract phase to make sure that that team understands whenua ownership and its ability to, or opportunity to deliver housing.
Yeah, true.
Good point. And again, yeah, not an area where we have a lot of current examples of CHPs on whenua Māori, but certainly an area where I think we can expect to see more development. So it's so important for us to continue to explore that kōrero. Just checking, Joey, did you have a pātai? So we just come off mute, Carl? No.
I just have a quick pātai, please, Wayne. Kia ora. And that's regarding an ahu whenua trust or any other whānau trust that want to do papakainga, but don't have the capacity to become a CHIP, and they want to go under the umbrella of an existing CHIP. So the pātai is around with the ahu whenua trust, and they already have their layout on what type of papakainga they're wanting. So they've already got their criteria, process, procedures, all of that. Will they need to go under the existing CHIP, the CHIP that they're wanting to go under's process and procedures? Or is that existing CHIP just the landlord over the papakainga or the whare?
Excellent pātai.
Yeah, I'm calling the excellent man to answer it too. Here we go.
In that instance, the IRRS payments, etc., would have to go through the registered CHIP. And our oversight as a regulatory authority is over the registered CHIP. So we assess their policies and procedures as part of registration. Now, they can enter into an arrangement with the smaller organisation that they subcontract out their tenancy management or the property and asset management. But that organisation that delivers those services does have to meet the policies and procedures that we've assessed at registration.
It can get very complicated.
It can get a bit complicated.
Yeah.
So yes is the answer.
Yeah, there's also, I'll just screen back there. There's also an aspect of distance involved here. We have had quite a few organisations say, oh, there is a housing provider near us. we would like to get them to do our tenancy management and our property asset management. Nearby is good, but we've had also several that want to do it at a significant geographical distance, and we do get a little bit dubious by that one, because they are not on the ground. They are not in a position to go there probably even monthly. So what we love to see any group making the best of what it does well and forming good partnerships with other groups who do different things well. There needs to be real synergy there. Umbrellaing is not something that we think is a good idea if there's a lot of distance involved.
Does that answer your question, Kahurangi? Great. Mr. Glaudel.
Mr. Glaudel, who's that? Kia ora koutou, Chris Glaudel with Community Housing Aotearoa, and Kahurangi on that one. I would suggest, and certainly Michaela and Marty, let me know if this is off base, but in that situation where you had specific criteria for who would occupy those homes, you could put that into your management agreement with the CHIP that you contracted, and then have them submit those requirements for those specific properties to the regulatory authority. And so there would be a clear line of sight that for this particular set of properties, because of the management agreement, who owns it, and their requirement that it serve, whānau, it should, I would think, then keep everybody safe in that space. But
great point, Chris. And yes, I agree with you there. I'm sure there are ways that we could factor that sort of stuff into it. So again, it's one of those issues where contact us, talk us through it, and I'm sure we could sort out a sensible solution to that.
Nice one, Chris. Thank you. I'm just checking, Shelby, did you have a pātai? I saw your hand raised.
Kia ora. I was just thinking it just, I'm helping at the moment on our committee of management for Māori Exon Corporation, and we're in the process of developing 8 whare, to go on our land, which is Māori land, and we originally started the process with Ministry of Housing and Urban Development regarding funding to just sort of get and with a CHIP. And, like we actually had te runa, we weren't going to become a CHIP ourselves, but we've actually deviated away from that, now gone to Te Puni Kōkiri, who will be providing us the funding if our application is successful for that side of things. But I see the dilemma, all of these pātai have been so relevant to our situation. And it's making me think, actually, how are we, we'd originally thought actually we just go to someone like Ray White and get them to, to try and do that, because our whānau up there can be quite feisty. So, and we don't necessarily want to put anybody in the hot seat there. So I think I was kind of, I think my question has probably been answered throughout all of the kōrero that has come about. So thanks, Wayne, but I just wanted to just kind of share. It's just an interesting, it's very fluid and it's very agile. We've had to be really agile in that space in order to realise the opportunity that is in front of us. And this is just the first stage. So yeah.
Well, I want to thank you, Michaela, and to your offsider there in the background for a very insightful presentation that's given us a real glimpse into those 2 important performance standards. I know there's a lot more sitting behind those, but great to begin to familiarise ourselves with all of the performance standards. So thank you once again for your presentation. I'm going to begin to wrap us up, whānau. Kelly, in a moment, I'll just check in and see whether there's anything you have in terms of closing remarks, and I'll hand over to you in a moment, Jen, too, to see whether there's any closing comments that you have. I just wanted to share a couple of little points here that, and I know Jen has referred to these earlier in the wānanga as well. You know how they say on cooking programs, here's one I prepared earlier. So Te Matapihi does actually have a set of performance standard templates. I know Jen's referred to that, which we've specifically developed to assist aspiring Māori CHPs. We do tend to carefully control who we share those templates with, to ensure that they're not falling into the hands of consultants who will then utilize them basically to charge out and, you know, get Māori organizations to pay for something that we've created for free, for them to be able to access for free. So those are available. I'll check in a moment with Jen to see if you have any kōrero about that, Jen. But please do reach out directly to Jen if you would like to know more about that. And the other thing I wanted to mention for those of you who do decide to go down the path of registering as a community housing provider, Te Matapihi has just received the go-ahead from a number of Māori CHPs. So there are around about 20 kaupapa Māori CHPs out there in the sector at the moment. We put the call out to see whether there's interest and support for a Māori CHP network, and we received a resounding yes to that pātai. So we're in very early stages yet of trying to understand what the terms of reference for that network will be, but already you know, there's likely to be at least two key elements. One around understanding some of the policy, regulatory, and other systemic type issues that Māori CHPs that are specific to delivery of a kaupapa Māori service that those CHPs are experiencing, so that we can help to navigate some of those issues and perhaps advocate where appropriate to various agencies, and also to provide a forum for those CHPs to come together, to share experiences, to share resources, and just provide that mutual support, which is tremendously valuable. You know, there are a range of now of very experienced Māori CHPs who deliver great service, who deliver that service in a way that is very kaupapa Māori, and who do a great job. And you know, many of those chips are only too willing to share some of their experience. So something to look forward to. Again, if you do decide to go down this pathway, that there will be a network of support for you there. So Jen, just check in if you have any kind of final comments.
Thank you, Wayne. Not really any final comments from me. I really appreciate that you've gone over the tikanga of those templates. One of the reasons why we chose to develop them is we heard some horror stories about how much iwi and Māori were being charged for those to be developed, and that gave them no assurance or guarantee that they would then be CHIP registered, and often they were found lacking and it didn't result in registration. So Te Matapihi has invested heavily in those templates, and we're very, very keen to keep them free for iwi and Māori for as long as we possibly can. So everyone we talk to has been really supportive of our tikanga, and so I guess that's just the main kōrero on that part. And then Shelby, I've got your question here. Do you think there will be a similar forum for progressive home ownership providers? That is amazing that you have asked. We actually did that last year. So last year we developed, so QB and I did this with HUD, and we developed a series of 10 webinars. It is called Te Aho Tahuhu, and it takes you through the whole life of being a PHO. So on that, Shelby, it was a little bit more formal than this wānanga, but you will see that there is a lot of information available there from you, from many government agencies, financial institutions, and also current progressive home ownership providers. So thank you very much, Wayne. Thank you for facilitating. It's been lovely to have you on.
My pleasure. So, yeah, as we kind of now enter the closing up phases of our wānanga whānau, just want to hand over to Kelly to see whether you got any closing remarks here, brother.
Kia ora, Wayne. E ngā rauranga tirama a mātou mātou ko ngā kaimahi o te kaunihera rātou ko ngā kaimahi o Independent Māori Statute Board ka nui te mihi kia koutou mō koutou tautoko mō koutou whakaaro mō o koutou patapatai ki ngā regulatory authorities. Thank you very much for letting us sponsor this hui. The Te Matapihi for facilitating for us, for putting the content together. It's been a really, really tangible piece of work for us to deliver on the mana outcome of Kia ora te kāinga. So really, really thank you for your attendance. I've just dropped in the chat box. I have a very small team. It's me, a couple of planners and a relationship advisor. We work across the 1,500 kaimahi within regulatory services at Auckland Council, resource consents, building consents, our engineers. If there's anyone that needs a help, I don't offer this very often, any OP that need a help to navigate our regulatory landscape, I've just dropped an email in there for my team, and my team and Shane Cook in our Māori Housing unit, always there to guide whānau rōpū iwi through the very, very complex web that is Auckland Council regulatory process. So nei rā te mihi kia koutou, mihi mai, kōrero mai, pātai mai, and looking forward to doing some more work with the respective rōpū here and carrying on their relationship with Te Matapihi. Tēnā tātou.
Pai, tēnā roti koe e wai, taonga tēnā. I'd also just like to provide the opportunity, Martin and Michaela, if you have any closing remarks you'd like to make. If you don't, that's fine as well.
Look, kia ora everybody. The only closing remarks that we have, please, if you've got any questions, get in touch with us. We're more than happy to answer those questions. We think we've got across a lot of information in the last few days, but there are lots more details that we simply didn't have the time to dive into. So if you've got any questions about that, Michelle is your first point of contact. And lastly, look, just thank you to everybody. It's really inspiring when we come along to these things and we see groups and organisations that are working to deliver a safe, warm, dry home. It's really inspiring for us. So thank you very much for the opportunity to be here.
Tēnā koe, Martin, and tēnā koki koe, Michaela. Thank you both. Just a reflection for me, you know, that the pennies really dropped actually. I know we talk about one of the benefits of CHIP registration being that level of support around what good practice looks like, and I really got that from your presentation. You know, this is kind of gold standard practice of how to deliver housing, social housing. So important, and just really acknowledge you for the important mahi that you do, and for I know this has been a first for TRA. It's been a first for us as well. So thank you for coming along on this journey with us. So whānau, just as we begin now to wrap up our wānanga, you know, Te Matapihi literally are here to provide a window that offers insight and vision for our people. And I think we've managed to do that. We have just provided a window into the realm of CHP, becoming a CHP and what that looks like. And we wouldn't have been able to do that without all of your support. So to the Independent Māori Statutory Board who saw the potential in our desire, our vision to want to offer something is focused in the space, thank you. Thank you also to Council and especially to Kelly, who have seen the vision as well, and we couldn't have done this without you. Thank you to our colleagues from TRA, who are always only too willing to rise to support the kaupapa. And just want to also acknowledge Chris and the team from CHA for being here, and for all of you who don't know, CHA's the peak body for the community housing sector, and also our partner in delivering support services to the homeless in the sector. And I'm sure Chris will agree with me when I say CHA is absolutely here to support you on your journey as well. And want to really acknowledge the fine work that Jean and Kirby have done in bringing this this opportunity to you all. So thank you for delivering such a professional, well-rounded opportunity to share this information to Jean and Kirby. And finally, last but not least, thank you all for being here. We know at Te Matapihi that the reason why people take on this mahi is not because they want to become property developers and make lots of money. It's because they understand the how important it is as a social good for our whānau to provide, as Martin said, safe, warm, affordable housing. So I acknowledge you all for that commitment and encourage you all on your journey. So hoi anō e tātou mā koutou rā, e mahi nei te mahi, hei paenga mo te iwi, kia kaha, kia u, kia manawa nui. I'm going to take us to the close here with a waiata for our karakia. Hoi anō, e rauranga tira mā, e ngā maunga whakahi, e ngā wai whakaika, o ngā kāinga huhua, puta no i te motu, tēnā koutou huri noa, tō tātou whare kōrero e tēnei ata, tēnā koutou kia rahuhi mā tātou katoa, kia i nei tātou. Te atua, nei o pono ngā e whakamoemiti atu ki a koe, kia tukua mai te aroha me te mara mātanga. Kia tika taku haere i te mata o te whenua. Kia u tō maramatanga i roto i a haue. Mauri ore te whānau, have a great Friday and enjoy your weekend. Welcome you all back to join us here and sometime in the future. Kia ora tātou katoa.
Wow, Wayne, thank you.
Te wā.